The Book of Beginnings, Lesson 25, Favorite Son. We're going to be in the 37th chapter of Genesis. We've gotten all the way through to into Jacob's life and his name changing from Jacob to Israel, and it gives us an idea of where the nation of Israel came from and where it came from, the covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and then Jacob, Israel. And now we're going to take it over into the 37th chapter. I'm skipping most of the 36th chapter because most of it is the genealogy of Esau's family. And if you all want to go through that, we will, and cover which one had this many kids and which one had this many kids, but I don't think you want to. Do I? So next time we'll do an in-depth study of the book of Leviticus, just for Tommy. Genesis 37, verse 1. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. These are the family records of Jacob. At 17 years of age, Joseph tended sheep with his brothers. The young man was working with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought a bad report about them to their father. Now, I said I was going to skip the 36th chapter, but I'm going to share a couple of passages from there to get us started here. 36:1, Genesis 36:1. These are the family records of Esau, that is Edom. Edom and Esau, same person. Esau took his wives from the Canaanite women: Adah, daughter of Elon the Hittite, Holabama, daughter of Anah, and granddaughter of Zibeon the Hittite, and Bashemath, the daughter of Ishmael, the sister of Naboth. Yeah, I like those names too. They're interesting. But if you remember, you see, he took two Canaanite women as wives, and he found out that Jacob was being sent back to the homeland where the family was to find him a wife, because his mother didn't like the fact that he had Rebecca didn't like the idea that he took Canaanite women and said they're causing him problems. So he figured, well, it's because I didn't marry within the family. And then comes the last one, Bashemath, the daughter of Ishmael. He married her. So he didn't quite get what was going on there. But it says this is the family records of him. That's the way it starts out. And then go down to the 6th verse. Esau took his wives, sons, daughters, and all the people of his household, as well as his herds, all his livestock, and all the property he had acquired in Canaan. He went to a land away from his brother Jacob, for their possessions were too many for them to live together, and because of their herds, the land where they stayed could not support them. So Esau, that is Edom, lived in the mountains of Seir. Now, Edom, just in case you want to know, that's the Hebrew word for Edom, and it tells you what Edom is and what it means and so on. And he's the father of the Idumeans, which you'll read about later on in the Old Testament and even into part of the New Testament. So why did Esau move instead of Jacob settling somewhere else? Because Jacob had come back from the land of Haran, from Laban's household, and he had come back, and he came back to the land of Canaan, back to where he was raised, where his father was. And when he came there, Esau moved to let Jacob settle there. And I put a suggestion there, but what I think it is, more than anything else, is that Jacob is the one that got the birthright. And Jacob is the one that got the blessing. So he got the blessing and the birthright, so the rightful owner there would be Jacob. And you can tell the difference in how much Esau had changed over the years, in the 20-some years that Jacob was gone, because now he was very congenial to him and very friendly, and they got along good as brothers, it seemed like. And he moved to leave the land open for Jacob. So to give you an idea where he moved, I've got two maps here, but you can see this is the Dead Sea. Well, down here's the Dead Sea. I did this in two maps because I couldn't find one to really show what I wanted to see. And up here at the top, you'll see Hebron up here. And down here, you'll see Seir, this area here. And all this area is Edom. So all of this is what Esau's family eventually inhabited. And this is the area here of Seir. And so up here, and you can see it over here, Jacob came down to Bethel, and then he came down to Hebron, and that's where he settled. And down here below Zoar, down here, which is down here, is where Esau and his family settled. So it put some distance between them, so they were not that far apart, but they were far enough apart where they could... It's hard for us to conceive of the way things were back then. They had flocks that they grazed, so you had to have land enough to graze your flocks. If you had too many on one area, naturally it would destroy all the hay, the grass, whatever was there. They would destroy all of it, and everybody would suffer. So, the 36th chapter says the lineage of Esau. So it brings us back to 37th chapter, verse 1. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. These are the family records of Jacob. At 17 years of age, Joseph tended sheep with his brothers. The young man was working with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought a bad report about them to their father. Now I'm going to back up again to the 35th chapter because it's going to have something that's going to tie in before we get to the end of Genesis. Genesis 35:22. While Israel was living in that region, Reuben went in and slept with his father's concubine, Bilhah. And Israel heard about it. Didn't do anything about it, but he heard about it. And I put a note down here that the Talmud saw in the story an intention on the part of Reuben to sully the bloodline, if you will, of Bilhah, because Bilhah was Rachel, who was Jacob's favorite wife, was Rachel, and Rachel had died. And after Rachel died, the next wife in line, this is what a lot of the Jewish rabbis think, that because of this, because Rachel had died, the next wife in line would be Bilhah. So he went in and sullied that particular line so that his mother Leah would be next in line instead of Bilhah. Whether that's true or not, I have no idea. That's just what some of they say, what some of the teachers, some of the rabbis of the Jews say what had happened there. We don't know. We just know that that was not the right thing for him to do. That was Bilhah, who was a concubine of Jacob's, which is concubine is basically a lesser wife. And I'm going to go back and repeat this scripture again, and for a different reason. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. These are the family records of Jacob. At 17 years of age, Joseph tended sheep with his brothers. The young man was working with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. Who's Bilhah and Zilpah? Bilhah was one of the handmaidens, and Zilpah was Leah's handmaiden, and it's with their sons that he was working with. And it says his father's wives. So you know that notice that they refer to them not as concubines now, but as wives. And there's different reasons that people think that's true. But anyway, he said his wives. He brought, and Joseph went to work with them and brought a bad report back to his dad. Do you all see any problem? The Torah announces the line of Jacob and then immediately proceeds to the story of Joseph. If you'll notice, it talks about Jacob in the 37th chapter, the first verse, and then immediately starts talking about Jacob. It says the rest of the book of Genesis is primarily about Jacob. In fact, this is the longest single story in the book of Genesis, has to do I'm not Jacob, with Joseph. It has to do with Joseph. The only other story in the whole of the Old Testament that's longer in the Torah is the story of Moses and his life and what happened with him. But so the second longest story of any one person is Joseph, and that's what we'll be talking about tonight. So it jumped over Jacob, basically, when it said about this is the lineage, it told this is the lineage of Esau, and it said this is the lineage of Jacob, and then it starts talking about Joseph, and it says Joseph was 17 years old. He went to work with his brothers. It said it's considered by secular scholars of literature one of the most compelling and profound human stories ever written. So secular writers and people in literature take the story of Joseph as being a great story. If nothing else, it's a wonderful story, and we know it's more than that. And it starts out at 17 years of age, Joseph tended sheep with his brothers. The young man was working with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought a bad report about them to their father. And I put down here that until this time, Bilhah and Zilpah were considered concubines, lesser wives, but now they have been promoted to full wife. Now, we know that Rachel had died. At what point Leah died, we don't know, because it never tells us. But there have been promoted, if you will, if you could say it's promoted, they have been seen not as lesser wives anymore, but as full wives. If you were assigned to work out in the field with your older brothers, half-brothers, and you're the son of the favorite wife, would it be smart for you to come back and give a bad report about the boys you're working with? He was 17, had an inflated sense of justice. It was not smart for him to go tell on or tattle on his brothers. Not a good idea. It wasn't a good idea when I was growing up. You didn't tattle on your brothers because you get hurt. What reason would Joseph's brothers have to hate him? Verse 2 says, he brought a bad report about them to their father. Verse 3 says, Israel loved Joseph best of all his sons. Everybody knew it. And to make it worse, the last part of the third verse, he made him a coat, a special coat that we say a coat of many colors is the way that we refer to it. Now, whether it means many colors or not, I don't know, but none of this would endear him to his brothers. That's for sure. Colors here, we're not sure, I'm not sure, and I'm not a Hebrew scholar, that's for sure, whether it means coat of many colors or something else, because here is the definition for colors that it has there. By implication, you see here, by implication, plural, a long and sleeved tunic, perhaps simply a wide one, from the original sense of the root, for instance, of many breadths or different colors. So who knows? I've always heard it all my life, coat of many colors. That's the way it is in the King James Bible, so that settles it. It's the coat of many colors. And I just had a picture that I ran across of a young guy wearing a coat that's, or like he might have worn at that particular time, might have looked at that particular time. I guess how old is he? Does he look 17? He's hard to tell. Some look older than others at different times. Genesis 37, verse 4. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not bring themselves to speak peaceably to him. They couldn't even talk to him. They couldn't even speak peaceably, it says, or in any kind of peace at all with their brother. They hated him so bad because their father, when you could tell to begin with, and you followed through as each one of the children, each one of the sons were born, and you could see that there was a rivalry between Leah and Rachel, and then you added Bilhah and Zilpah into the group, and so you had even more of a rivalry there. You knew that was going to carry right on over into their sons, because you know mamas talked to their boys, and what they said to them was not very nice about the other ones, I'm quite sure. We don't know that, but I'm just assuming. But they hated him so bad they couldn't even bring themselves to talk to him. to top it all off. Then Joseph had a dream. When he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He was already hated. They didn't like him. He was a favorite son. He got him a special coat from his dad because of all that. Then he has a dream. Well, what does he do? He goes and tells his brothers. You all remember what the dream was. There we were, binding sheaves of grain in the field. Suddenly my sheaf stood up, and your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf. Can you... The boy, we know Joseph turned out to be a fine man. He was not a very smart fella at 17 years old. I mean, if you have a dream like this, you don't tell somebody else. If I dreamed that Tommy was going to be my slave, I wouldn't tell him. We just wait for it to come to pass. I'm not going to tell him about it. But here, he comes and tells his brothers. And this is what they said in the 8th verse. Are you really going to reign over us? His brothers asked him, are you really going to rule over us? So they hated him even more because of his dream and what he had said. Who would ever guessed? They said they hated him more. He went and told them. So that was good enough. He learned his lesson. Was there anything in the dream that was not accurate? The dream was accurate because that's what happened later on. Was it smart for him to share it? No. Did Joseph learn any wisdom from this encounter? Verse 9. Then he had another dream. So this time he's going to keep it to himself, right? Because he learned better the first time. And told it to his brothers. Look, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun, moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. 10th verse. He told his father and brothers, but his father rebuked him. What kind of a dream is this that you have had? He said, are your mother and brothers and I going to come and bow down to the ground before you? He even ticked his dad off on this one. And so what are you talking about? We're going to bow down to you. What kind of stuff are you telling? Well, Joseph telling the truth, and what he saw was true. Just because you know something is true doesn't mean you have to tell everybody. And a lot of times you use wisdom if you don't. He didn't. And I just put a note here that Joseph, what he was noted for in Egypt was being an interpreter of dreams. He started off by having 2 dreams. He didn't interpret them, but it was easy to interpret them. You didn't have to read much between the lines to know that what he was talking about, what this dream meant. There are some scholars, I'm going to put this note in there in case you ran into it, that says that there in the Torah here, there's an inconsistency in the Torah because it says about his mother. Well, his mother was already dead. So if his mother was already dead, how could he be saying that she was going to bow down to him? So I'm going to give you some ideas of what they could be talking about. Because I don't think there was a mistake in the Torah. I don't think there was an inconsistency in the Torah. And Jacob, you remember when his mother died is when Benjamin was born, and Jacob was just a boy. Well, the handmaiden of Rachel was Bilhah. So the one that would have raised Jacob would have been Bilhah. So he could have been talking about her. Who knows? Jacob could have been pointing out how absurd it was for his mother to bow down to him since she was dead. And he could have just been pointing that out and not. It's a dream. It's something that it's not a real life thing happening. It may have been figurative. Very easily could have been. So any of those could be true, or none of those could be true, and a lot of things could be true, but all I'm telling you is what the Torah said is what it means. Verse 12. His brothers had gone to pasture their father's flocks in Shechem. Remember a couple of weeks ago we were talking about Shechem, or last week talking about Shechem and what happened in Shechem with Dinah and so on. And they were going to pasture the sheep in Shechem. This is his brothers. Israel said to Joseph, now Israel, Jacob, I don't think he's very smart in what he's going to do here. Your brothers, are pasturing the flocks at Shechem. Get ready, I'm sending you to them. Well, you remember how far Shechem was from where they were living at this particular time, and so they were days away, and he's getting ready to send his son, who they all hate, to spend time with them out in the country by themselves. Get ready, I'm sending you to them. I'm ready, Joseph replied. He wasn't very smart either. Then Israel said to him, go and see how your brothers and the flocks are doing, and bring word back to me. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. And I put the question I've been asking all the time, does this seem like a good idea? And no, it's not a good idea. In Genesis 50, 19, we're not jumping all the way over there, but it said, but Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You planned evil against me. God planned it for good, to bring about the present result, the survival of many people. So we're going to be reading about what happened to them and what they did to him. And Joseph later on, this is when Joseph was facing his own death, and he told them, that they were afraid that if after he died, there's no telling what would happen to them. He said, don't be upset, don't be concerned. You meant this for bad. God meant it for good. And people, and I'm going to tell you, I'm not one of them, and they say that God planned all this out, all this of taking Joseph and throwing him in the pit and then selling him into slavery and all this kind of stuff, that God planned it all out that way in order for this to happen. Could God have gotten Joseph to Egypt and gotten him second in command without going through all that? Yes. So what's happening is, this is Randy's take on all of it, this is what fallen man does. His brothers did him wrong. It worked out so that he wound up in a place where he needed to be to start with. It might have been that God was trying to talk to Joseph all the time. He said, look, you need, and talk to Israel too, talk to Jacob too, and say, you need to send your son to Egypt. I've got a plan for him in Egypt. We don't know, but we know the way you wound up getting there. 37:18. They saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him before he even got there. They said to one another, here comes that dreamer. Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of the pits. So what they planned to do was kill him when he got there. We can say that a vicious animal ate him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. Okay. Of all the reasons they had to not like Joseph, the one that seemed to be, that really was a bridge too far, was his dream that he was going to rule over them. Because that's what they brought up when they talked about it, because they said this dreamer. So that it bothered them. Then we'll see what becomes of this dream. It was a threat to them. We know that they didn't like that, but they didn't like the fact that he was the father's favorite son. Didn't like the fact that their father paid special attention to him. But this part, because this particular part, if they had to bow down to him, this has to do with not only them, but their descendants, their children and their children's children. Because if you're going to be, who's the oldest of Jacob's sons? It's Reuben. So who's supposed to be the one that gets the double portion? And it's when Israel dies, it's supposed to be Reuben. Who's the youngest? Benjamin. Who's next to the youngest? Joseph. So next to the youngest, out of all these 12 kids, all these 12 sons, the next to the youngest is the one that's going to wind up with the biggest inheritance. And they don't want this to happen. 37:18. They saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes that dreamer. Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of the pits. We can say that a vicious animal ate him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams." When Reuben, who's the oldest? Remember the one that slept with his father's wife? So he's not exactly a sterling character. When Reuben heard this, he tried to save him from them. He said, "Let's not take his life." Reuben also said to them, "Don't shed blood. Throw him," so he's coming up with a better plan, "throw him into the pit in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him," intending to rescue him from their hands and return him to his father. So he had good plans. We're going to throw him in a pit, but at least he was going to come back and get him and deliver him to his father. When Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped off his robe, the robe of many colors that he had on. Then they took him and threw him into the pit. Look at this. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. And in verse 25, then they sat down to eat a meal. They just threw their brother into a dry pit with no water and no food, and they sat down to eat. They looked up, and there was a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were carrying aromatic gum, balsam, and resin. We say it rosin around here. That's what I always said. It was resin. Going down to Egypt. Telushkin, who is a Jewish rabbi, this is what he says. There are a few more damning lines in the Bible. These men have just thrown their brother into a pit where they intend to leave him until he died of hunger and thirst. The Bible emphasizes that the pit had no water, and then they sat down and enjoyed a meal. Now think about that. Not just that they threw him in a pit, their intention was to leave him in that pit. Reuben was one that was going to come back and rescue him. That's what his intentions were. But their intention was to leave him in there until he died. And how would he die? He would die either a wild animal getting there and kill him, or he would starve to death or die of thirst. That's some nice brothers. I'm glad my family is better than that. Verse 26. Then Judah said to his brother, okay, let's get this. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. What's important about Judah? Judah is one of the tribe of David, comes from Judah, and Jesus is born of the tribe of Judah. And Judah winds up with the best blessing at the end of Genesis, as you'll see when we get there. And so, but this is the Judah that we're talking about. Judah said to his brothers, "What do we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him." So it was Judah that came up with the idea to sell their brother. Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay a hand on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. So instead of killing him, we're going to sell him as a slave. It's nice of him. And they agreed. When the Midianite traders passed by, the brothers pulled Joseph out of the pit and sold him for 20 pieces of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took Joseph to Egypt. How many pieces of silver was Jesus sold for? Because people conflate these two and say that this is a type of Jesus because he was sold for 20 pieces of silver. Jesus was 30 pieces of silver. So it's not the same thing. Sometimes we try to make a story where there's not one. It took Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone. What am I going to do?" So they took Joseph's robe, slaughtered a young goat, and dipped the robe in its blood. They sent the robe of many colors to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it. Is it your son's robe or not?" It's a good thing they didn't have DNA back then, or they would have been in trouble. Any questions?